The divorce papers were already signed in his mind. He just wanted to make it a spectacle first. Julian Thorne, the tech world's newly crowned king, didn't just want to leave his wife, Flora. He wanted to erase her. Standing under the crystal chandeliers of the Grand Plaza, he held his mistress's hand and laughed, calling his wife dead weight in front of the city's elite. He thought he was untouchable. He thought Flora was just a quiet, penniless woman he had outgrown. But Julian forgot one crucial detail: you don't bite the hand that secretly feeds you. He didn't know that the grey-haired man stepping onto the stage wasn't just a guest. He was the owner of the very ground Julian stood on, and he was about to turn the billionaire's empire into dust. The air inside the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel in Manhattan smelled of expensive perfume lilies and betrayal. It was the 10th anniversary of Thorne Enterprises, a night meant to celebrate a decade of innovation, and the man behind it, Julian Thorne. But for Flora Thorne, his wife of 12 years, the night felt less like a celebration and more like a public execution. Flora stood near a pillar, clutching a glass of sparkling water she had no intention of drinking. She wore a vintage midnight blue velvet gown. It was elegant, understated, and timeless everything her husband currently despised. Across the room, Julian was holding court. He looked every bit the billionaire titan, tall, sharp-jawed, wearing a bespoke Brioni suit that cost more than most people's cars. But his arm wasn't linked with Flora's. It was wrapped possessively around the waist of Sasha Miller, a 24-year-old influencer and brand ambassador for Thorne Enterprises. Sasha was a vision in sheer gold, a dress that shouted for attention, dripping in diamonds that Flora recognized from the company's corporate account. He's not even trying to hide it anymore. A hushed voice whispered nearby. Flora didn't turn. She knew the socialites of the Upper East Side were feasting on her humiliation. Julian caught Flora's eye across the room. He didn't smile. Instead, he smirked, whispered something into Sasha's ear that made the younger woman giggle and cover her mouth, and then he waved Flora over. It wasn't an invitation, it was a summons. Flora took a breath, steeling her nerves. She walked through the parting crowd, head held high. When she reached them, the circle of sycophants, board members, investors, and minor celebrities fell silent. Flora. Julian said, his voice booming, slightly clearly performing for the audience. I was just telling Sasha about the early days. You remember, don't you? When we lived in that shoebox in Queens. I remember, Julian, Flora said softly. I remember working 2 shifts at the diner so you could buy your first server. Julian let out a dry, dismissive laugh. Yes, yes. Cute. But let's be honest, darling. You were built for the struggle, not the success. Look at you. He gestured vaguely at her dress. You look like a librarian at a funeral. Sasha here represents the future of Thorne Enterprises. Vibrant. New. Alive. The insult hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Sasha smirked, sipping her Dom Perignon. Oh, Julian, don't be mean. She tries her best. Not everyone can keep up with a visionary. Flora felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she refused to cry. Not here. Is there a point to this, Julian? Or did you just call me over to compare me to your employee? Julian's eyes hardened. The playfulness vanished. The point, Flora, is that tonight is about the future. And frankly, I don't want you in the photos for the keynote speech. You dim the brand. Go sit at table 42. A gasp rippled through the immediate circle. Table 42 was in the back, near the kitchen doors, usually reserved for low-level staff or overflow guests. The CEO's wife was being banished to the shadows, while the mistress stood at the head table. You want me to sit by the kitchen? Flora asked, her voice steady, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "I want you out of the way," Julian hissed, leaning in close so only she could hear. "I'm announcing the merger with Sterling Corp tonight. I'm finally a billionaire on paper, Flora. Real money. I don't need your penny-pinching, be careful Julian attitude anymore. I've outgrown you. Tonight is the beginning of my new life. Do us both a favor and disappear until the lawyers call you in the morning." Flora looked at the man she had loved for 12 years. She saw the greed in his eyes, the arrogance that had replaced the ambition she once admired. She looked at Sasha, who was preening like a cat that had gotten the cream. "Very well, Julian," Flora said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "I will go to table 42, but remember this arrogance is a debt that karma always collects with interest. Save the fortune cookie quotes for the diner." Julian scoffed, turning his back on her. "Come, Sasha, the photographers are waiting." As Flora walked away, navigating the sea of pitying glances, she didn't head to table 42 immediately. She stopped by the coat check, pulled a small secure phone from her clutch, a phone Julian didn't know existed, and sent a single text message. "It's time, Papa." He crossed the line. To understand the magnitude of Julian's mistake, one had to understand the lie at the center of his marriage. When Julian met Flora 12 years ago, she was indeed waitressing. She lived simply. She never spoke of family, implying she was estranged and poor. Julian, hungry and ambitious, liked that. He liked being the hero. He liked having a wife who was dependent on him, someone who looked at him like he hung the moon because he paid the rent. He never bothered to dig deeper. He never asked why Flora spoke 3 languages fluently, or why she knew exactly which fork to use at a 12-course dinner, or how she understood complex contract law, despite having no formal degree he knew of. He didn't know that Flora was born Flora Vance. The Vances were not rich in the way Julian was rich. They didn't have Instagram accounts or appear on Forbes lists. They were the people who owned the ink Forbes was printed with. They were old money industrialists, land barons, the kind of wealth that whispered rather than shouted. Flora had left that world because she wanted to be loved for herself, not her father's empire. Her father, Magnus Vance, a man rumored to be able to crash a stock market with a phone call, had let her go on one condition: if he ever disrespects you, if he ever forgets your worth, you call me. For 12 years, Flora protected Julian. She used her inheritance anonymously to fund his first failing startups through shell companies. When Thorn Enterprises was nearly bankrupt 3 years ago, it was a miraculous investment from a generic holding company called V Corp that saved him. Julian thought he was a genius who attracted investors. In reality, he was a husband whose wife was quietly paying his bills. Back at the gala, the lights dimmed. Flora sat at table 42. The tablecloth was slightly stained, and the draft from the kitchen was cold. She watched the screens illuminate with a montage of Julian's achievements. Suddenly the ballroom doors swung open with a heavy thud, interrupting the intro music. It wasn't a loud entrance, but it was a commanding one. A group of 4 men walked in. They were dressed in suits that made Julian's Brioni look like off-the-rack polyester. At the center of them walked a man in his late 60s. He had steel-gray hair, swept back, a neatly trimmed beard, and eyes that looked like chips of ice. He walked with a cane topped with a silver wolf's head, but he didn't lean on it. He carried it like a weapon. The security guards, usually aggressive, stepped aside instinctively. There was an aura of power around this man that screamed danger. Julian, standing on the stage with a microphone, frowned. He squinted against the spotlight. "Excuse me. This is a private event. Security." The head of security, a burly man named Franks, hurried over to the newcomer. "Sir, I need to see your invitation." The grey-haired man didn't stop walking. He didn't even look at Franks. He simply held up a single finger. One of his bodyguards handed Franks a business card. Franks looked at the card, his face drained of colour. He immediately stepped back, bowing his head, and spoke into his radio. "Stand down! Let them through! Repeat, stand down!" Julian's irritation grew. This old man was stealing his thunder. Sasha tugged at Julian's sleeve. "Who is that? Why is everyone staring at him?" "I don't know," Julian muttered into the hot mic. "But he's about to be thrown out." The stranger continued his long walk toward the stage. But then he deviated. He didn't go to the VIP section. He didn't go to the bar. He walked straight to the back of the room through the shadows until he reached table 42. The entire room turned, craning their necks. The music had stopped. The silence was absolute. The man stopped in front of Flora. He looked at the kitchen doors, then at the stained tablecloth, and finally at his daughter. His eyes softened just for a fraction of a second before hardening into diamond-edged fury as he looked back towards the stage. "You kept your promise, Papa," Flora whispered, standing up. Magnus Vance took his daughter's hand and kissed it gently. Then his voice, deep and gravelly, carried through the silent ballroom without the need for a microphone. "I told you, Flora. You cannot build a castle on a swamp. Eventually the mud shows through." Julian, losing patience, barked from the stage. "Hey, old man, you're disturbing my wife, ex-wife. If you're looking for a handout, the soup kitchen is 3 blocks down. Get out before I have you arrested." Magnus slowly turned toward the stage. A terrifying smile played on his lips. It was the smile of a predator watching prey walk into a trap. "Arrested." Magnus chuckled a low sound that sent shivers down the spines of the board members who recognized him. "Mr. Thorne, I suggest you check who owns the mortgage of this hotel before you try to evict me. And while you're at it, check the name on the deed of the building your headquarters resides in." Julian laughed nervously. "I own my headquarters. I built it." "You built the walls," Magnus said, beginning to walk toward the stage, Flora on his arm. "But I own the land. I own the debt. And as of 10 minutes ago, I own the bank that holds your personal loans." Sasha whispered frantically. "Julian, who is he?" Julian's arrogance wavered. He looked at his CFO, who was frantically typing on a tablet in the front row. The CFO looked up his face, pale, and mouthed one word. "Vance." Julian froze. He knew the name Vance. Everyone in finance knew the name Vance. They were the invisible gods of the market. But why was a Vance walking arm in arm with Flora? The diner waitress from Queen's Magnus stopped at the foot of the stairs leading to the stage. He looked up at Julian like a judge looking at a convicted man. "You invited the world to watch your success, Julian," Magnus said calmly. "So let them watch. But first, get that harlot off my stage. You are standing next to my daughter's inheritance." The silence in the Pierre Hotel ballroom was heavy, the kind of silence that precedes a natural disaster. Julian Thorne stood on the stage, the microphone gripping his hand like a lifeline. He was sweating now, the heat of the stage lights suddenly unbearable. He looked down at Magnus Vance, the man he had just insulted, the man who claimed to hold the leash to his entire existence. Julian's ego inflated by years of yes men, and magazine covers refused to deflate instantly. He forced a laugh, a brittle cracking sound that echoed painfully through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian stammered, addressing the stunned crowd, "I apologize for this interruption. It seems we have a senile crasher. Security, I pay you to keep the riffraff out." But the security team didn't move. In fact, Franks, the head of security, was currently handing Magnus a bottle of water. "Franks!" Julian screamed, his voice breaking. Remove him. Magnus didn't even look up. He was busy adjusting the cuff of his jacket. Franks works for the hotel, Julian, and the hotel, as I mentioned, belongs to the Vance Group. You are currently trespassing on my stage. Sasha Miller, realizing the shift in power, tried to salvage the situation. She grabbed the microphone from Julian's hand. Listen here, you old creep. Do you know who we are? We are Thorn Enterprises. We are trending #1 globally right now. You can't just walk in here and... Sasha, be quiet. Flora's voice cut through the air. It wasn't a shout. It was a calm, melodic command. Flora stepped forward, leaving her father's side, to stand at the base of the stairs. She looked up at the woman wearing her diamonds holding her husband. You are trending, that is true, Flora said, her voice projecting clearly. But not for the reasons you think. Flora pointed to the massive LED screen behind Julian, which was supposed to be displaying the merger logo. The image flickered. The logo dissolved, replaced by a live feed of the ballroom itself. But it wasn't just a camera feed, it was a stream interface. YouTube Live, 1.2 million viewers. Comments scrolling too fast to read. You see, Julian, Flora said, I knew you were going to try to erase me tonight. I knew you'd try to make me look small so you could feel big. So I decided to let the world see the real you. I've been live streaming from my brooch since I walked in. Julian's face went ghastly white. He stared at the screen. The comments were brutal. Did he just call his wife dead weight? That's Magnus Vance. The Tech King is toast. Team Flora. You set me up, Julian roared, pointing a shaking finger at her. You planned this, you deceitful little... Deceitful... Magnus interrupted, his voice booming like thunder. He struck the floor with his cane, the sharp clack silencing Julian instantly. You speak of deceit, you who funded your visionary lifestyle on loans you never intended to repay. You who treated my daughter, a woman who gave up a dynasty to support a pauper, like garbage. Magnus began to ascend the stairs. He moved slowly, deliberately. Every step was a nail in Julian's coffin. You thought Flora was poor because she was humble, Magnus said, reaching the top of the stage. He towered over Julian despite being inches shorter. His presence was mountain-like. She wanted to build something real with you. She wanted a partnership based on love, not net worth. And what did you do? You took her kindness for weakness. Julian backed away, bumping into Sasha. I didn't know. How could I know? She never told me. Because she was testing you, you fool, Magnus spat. And you failed. You failed every single day for 12 years. But tonight was your final exam. And you got a 0. Magnus turned to the crowd, his eyes scanning the terrified board members. For those of you holding Thorn Enterprises stock, I suggest you sell, now, before the market opens tomorrow. You can't destroy my company, Julian shrieked, grabbing Magnus's lapel. It was a mistake. Before Julian could blink, one of Magnus's bodyguards was on the stage. With a blur of motion, Julian was in an arm lock, forced to his knees. The gasp from the audience was audible. Don't touch the suit, Magnus said, calmly brushing off his lapel. It's Italian silk. It costs more than your mistress's dignity. Sasha let out a cry of indignation. How dare you, Julian, do something? Julian, pinned to the floor, face pressed against the stage he had built, wheezed, Let me go! I'll sue you! I'll sue everyone! Sue, Magnus laughed. With what money? The money in your Cayman accounts. The money in the Swiss vault. Julian froze. His eyes bulged. Oh yes, Magnus whispered, leaning down so his face was inches from Julian's. I know about the offshore accounts, Julian. I know about the skimming. I know everything. And do you know why? Magnus stood up and gestured to the giant screen again. Because Flora wasn't just your wife. She was your bookkeeper. She just never told you she was also a forensic accountant. The revelation hit Julian like a physical blow. Flora. His quiet, mousy Flora, who he thought spent her days gardening and reading romance novels. She was the one who balanced the books. No. Julian whispered dust from the stage floor sticking to his lips. That's impossible. My CFO handles everything. Your CFO, Flora said, walking up the stairs to join them on stage, has been sending me copies of every transaction for 5 years. He knew who I was. He knew that if he didn't cooperate, his license would be revoked, and he'd never work in finance again. Flora pulled a small remote from her clutch. She clicked it. The screen behind them changed again. This time it wasn't a live stream. It was a spreadsheet, a massive, detailed, damning spreadsheet titled Project Vanity, Misappropriated Funds. The text was large enough for the back of the room to read. Item 1, $450. Marketing Consulting. Recipient, Sasha Miller. Personal account. Item 2, $2.1 million. Server upgrades. Recipient, Caribbean Shell Corp. Julian Thorne. Personal. Item 3, $150. Corporate housing. Reality penthouse lease for Sasha Miller. A ripple of shock went through the room. The board members were on their feet. The investors were shouting. This wasn't just drama. This was federal crime territory. This was embezzlement. Sasha stared at the screen, her face twisted. She wasn't looking at the legal implications. She was looking at the numbers. Wait, Sasha said, her voice shrill. You told me the penthouse was bought. You said you owned it outright. You're leasing it with company money. Julian, still held down by the bodyguard, struggled to look at her. Sasha, baby, it's complicated. Complicated, Sasha screamed. You told me you were worth $3 billion. You told me I was set for life. I will be, Julian pleaded. Once the merger goes through. The merger, Magnus interrupted his voice, dripping with ice, is dead. Sterling Corp isn't merging with you, Julian, Magnus signaled to a man in the front row, the CEO of Sterling Corp. The man stood up, looked at Julian with disgust and simply shook his head. He turned and walked out of the ballroom. No! Julian screamed. Come back, we have a deal. You had a deal with a fraud, Flora said, looking down at him. And now they know. But Julian, the money isn't the worst part. It's where the money came from originally. Flora clicked the remote again. A new document appeared. It was dated 12 years ago. A seed funding agreement for Julian's very first startup. Investor Vance Holdings via Shell Corp Alpha. Amount $500,000. Signature Flora Vance. The room went deadly silent. You didn't get that grant because you were a genius, Julian. Flora said, her voice shaking slightly with the release of a decade-long secret. You were rejected by every bank in the city. I remember you crying on our mattress on the floor. I couldn't bear to see you broken, so I asked my father for my trust fund early. I gave it all to you, every cent. Julian looked up at her, his eyes wide with horror. You funded me. I built you, Flora corrected him. I bought the servers. I paid the first engineers. I kept the lights on when you were too proud to get a job. And I did it anonymously so your fragile ego wouldn't shatter. I wanted you to feel like a king, Julian. I wanted you to feel powerful. She stepped closer, her heel clicking on the stage next to his hand. And how did you repay me by taking that power and using it to humiliate me? By using the money I gave you to buy diamond necklaces for a girl who doesn't even know your middle name? Sasha looked at the screen, then at Julian, and finally at Magnus Vance, the real power in the room. Her survival instinct kicked in. She unclasped the heavy diamond necklace from her neck. It clattered onto the stage floor next to Julian's head. "I didn't know," Sasha said, turning to Flora, tears streaming down her face, though whether they were real or an act, no one could tell. "I swear, Flora, he told me you were horrible. He told me you trapped him. I didn't know he was stealing." "Save it," Flora said coldly. "You knew he was married. That's enough." Sasha looked around, realized her social climbing ladder had just turned into a slide to hell, and bolted. She ran off the stage, through the crowd and out the doors, the paparazzi flashes chasing her like lightning. Julian was alone. The mistress was gone. The investors were gone. The reputation was gone. "You can't do this." Julian sobbed his bravado, finally dissolving into pure, pathetic fear. "I'm Julian Thorne. I'm a visionary." Magnus tapped his cane on the floor. "You are a thief, Mr. Thorne, and you have stolen from the Vance family." "Do you know what we do with thieves?" Magnus turned to the side of the stage. Two men in dark suits walked out. They weren't hotel security. They weren't bodyguards. One of them held a badge. "FBI," the agent announced. "Julian Thorne, we have a warrant for your arrest for securities fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering." Julian went limp in the bodyguard's grip. "Flora." He wheezed, looking at his wife one last time. "Flora, please. Help me. I'm your husband." Flora looked down at him. The love she had held for him for 12 years, the love that had made her hide her identity, the love that had made her patient, it was finally completely gone. "You're not my husband, Julian," she said, turning her back on him. "You're just a bad investment, and I'm liquidating my assets." The transition from the velvet-draped ballroom of the Pierre Hotel to the interrogation room at the FBI field office in Lower Manhattan was violent in its starkness. There were no chandeliers here, no champagne, just a single buzzing fluorescent light that flickered with a maddening rhythm and a stainless steel table bolted to the floor. Julian Thorne sat on a metal chair, his bespoke Brioni suit jacket, confiscated his tie, removed to prevent self-harm. He was shivering. The adrenaline of the gala had worn off, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. He had been sitting there for 3 hours. No one had spoken to him. It was a power move, and he knew it. Finally, the heavy door buzzed and swung open. 2 people walked in. One was the agent who had arrested him, Agent Harrison, a man with a face like carved granite. The other was a woman Julian didn't recognize. She was sharp-dressed in a charcoal pantsuit, carrying a thick accordion folder. "I want my lawyer," Julian snapped, trying to summon the ghost of his CEO authority. "I want Marcus Stone. Get him on the phone. Now." The woman sat down opposite him, placing the folder on the table with a heavy thud. She didn't open it immediately. She just looked at him with a mixture of pity and amusement. "Mr. Stone isn't coming, Julian," she said. Her voice was professional, clipped. "He's on a retainer," Julian shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "I pay him $50,000 a month specifically for situations like this." "Mr. Stone has recused himself," Agent Harrison said, leaning against the wall. "It seems there was a conflict of interest. Apparently his firm also represents the bank your father-in-law just bought. Mr. Vance made it clear that representing you would be career suicide." Julian felt the blood drain from his face. "So I have no one." "You have a public defender assigned to you," the woman said. "He's parking his Toyota right now. But I'm not here to talk about your defense. I'm Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Jenkins. I'm here to talk about your plea." "Plea?" Julian laughed incredulously. "I haven't even been charged. This is a misunderstanding. My wife is hysterical. She's manipulating the data. It's a domestic dispute." Jenkins opened the folder. It wasn't just a few papers. It was a stack of transcripts, bank records, and photos. "We have the logs from the Cayman Shell Company, Julian," Jenkins said, flipping a page. "We know you funneled $3 million of investor money into Project Vanity. But that's the boring part. We also have the wiretaps." Julian froze. "Wiretaps?" "You weren't careful, Julian. You used the company phone to call your broker in Zurich. You used the company email to set up the purchase of illegal diamonds to hide assets. And guess who authorized the security protocols on those devices?" Julian's mind raced back to a conversation 3 years ago. Flora had suggested they upgrade the company's cybersecurity. She said she knew a firm, V Corp Security. "Flora," Julian whispered. "She recorded me. Every keystroke, every call, for 3 years," Jenkins confirmed. "She gave us everything this morning, but that's not the worst part for you." Jenkins pulled out a photo. It was a grainy surveillance shot of a woman entering the federal building earlier that morning. "Do you recognize her?" Julian squinted. Sasha Miller." Jenkins nodded. "She was picked up trying to board a flight to Dubai an hour ago. We offered her a deal 5 years in federal prison for being an accomplice to money laundering or full immunity if she testifies against you." Julian felt like he was choking. "She wouldn't. She loves me." Agent Harrison let out a sharp, barking laugh. "She loves not wearing an orange jumpsuit, Julian. She sang like a canary. She told us about the bribes to the city inspectors. She told us about the fake invoices. She even told us about the time you bragged that your wife was too stupid to notice the missing funds." Julian slumped in his chair. The walls of the room felt like they were closing in. He had lost his lawyer. He had lost his mistress. He had lost his company. "What do you want?" Julian croaked. "We want the names of the board members who helped you," Jenkins said, leaning in. "You didn't do this alone. Someone cooked the books before Flora caught them. Give us the CFO. Give us the auditors. And maybe we recommend 15 years instead of 25. Julian stared at the metal table. He thought of Flora. He thought of her quiet smiles, the way she used to massage his shoulders after a long day, the way she had literally bought his career. And he realized with a sickening jolt that she hadn't just watched him fall. She had dug the pit, covered it with leaves, and waited 3 years for him to step into it. "I want to see her," Julian said, his voice trembling. "She's not coming," Harrison said. "I have something on her." Julian lied, desperation clawing at his throat. I have secrets about the Vance family. If she doesn't come here, I'll tell the press everything." Jenkins and Harrison exchanged a look. Jenkins shrugged. "I'll pass on the message. But, Julian, I wouldn't bet against the house." 2 days later, Julian got his wish. He was moved to a visitation room. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that smelled of industrial detergent and other men's sweat. He hadn't showered. He looked 10 years older than he had at the gala. He sat behind the thick plexiglass, waiting. He expected Flora to walk in looking triumphant. He expected her to gloat. But when the door opened, it wasn't Flora. It was Magnus Vance. The billionaire industrialist looked impeccable in a navy 3-piece suit. He sat down gracefully on the other side of the glass, placing a sleek black phone on the ledge. He didn't pick up the receiver phone. He simply pressed a button on the visitor console that allowed them to speak through the grate. "Where is she?" Julian demanded, though his voice was weak. "I told them to send Flora." "Flora is busy," Magnus said calmly. "She is currently meeting with the shareholders of Thorn Enterprises, or rather what's left of it. She is orchestrating a hostile takeover of the remaining assets." "That's my company," Julian spat. "It was never your company," Magnus corrected him. "It was a toy my daughter bought you, and now she is taking it back to the store. Julian leaned into the glass, his eyes bloodshot. I told the feds I have dirt on you, Magnus. I know about the lithium deals in Nevada. I know about the unions you crushed in the 90s. If you don't get me out of here, I will sing. Magnus stared at him. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then a slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. Julian, you really are a novice, Magnus said softly. The lithium deal's public record. The unions settled in court 20 years ago. We are Vances. We do not hide our sins. We pay for them and move on. You, however, tried to hide yours. Magnus tapped a finger on the glass. But since you threatened my family, I decided to bring you a gift. Magnus pulled a folded newspaper from his jacket pocket and pressed it against the glass. It was the New York Times. The headline read, "The Fall of the Tech King Mistress Reveals Toxic Culture at Thorn Enterprises." Below it was a picture of Sasha Miller looking tearful and sympathetic in a press conference. Sasha is writing a book, Magnus explained casually. She's calling it The Gilded Cage. She claims you manipulated her, groomed her, and forced her to accept the gifts. The public loves her. She's already been offered a reality show. Julian shook his head violently. That's a lie. She begged for those diamonds. Does it matter? Magnus asked. The narrative is set. You are the villain. She is the victim. And Flora more so. Magnus flipped the newspaper to the business section. Flora Vance steps out of the shadows, the billionaire heiress who saved a company. Flora is the hero, Magnus said. She has pledged to liquidate your personal assets, the cars, the penthouse, the watch collection, and use the funds to pay back the employees you fired last month to boost your stock price. She has sent Flora now. Julian felt a physical pain in his chest. Everything he had built, his image, his wealth, his ego, was being systematically stripped away and given to the people he despised. Why? Julian whispered. Why go this far? Why not just divorce me? Magnus leaned forward, his grey eyes piercing through the glass. Because you didn't just cheat on her, Julian. You diminished her. You made her feel small to make yourself feel big. You took a woman of brilliance and treated her like an accessory, and then you humiliated her in front of the world. Magnus stood up, smoothing his suit. We Vances believe in karma, Julian, but we don't wait for the universe to deliver it. We deliver it ourselves. Wait. Julian panicked, realizing this was the last lifeline. Please, I'll sign whatever you want. I'll plead guilty. Just, can you get me a better prison minimum security? Please, Magnus, I won't survive in here. Magnus looked at the man who had called his daughter dead weight. He looked at the fear in his eyes. You're a resourceful man, Julian, Magnus said coldly. You started from nothing. Consider this a chance to do it all over again. Magnus turned and walked toward the door. Magnus! Julian screamed, slamming his fists against the glass. Magnus, tell Flora I love her. Tell her I'm sorry. Magnus paused at the door. He didn't turn around. She knows you're sorry, Julian. She just doesn't care anymore. The heavy metal door clanged shut, leaving Julian alone with his reflection in the glass. He looked at himself, the orange jumpsuit, the messy hair, the desperation. For the first time in 12 years, he saw exactly what Flora had seen at the gala. He saw a fraud. The winter in New York had been brutal, a relentless season of grey slush and biting winds that seemed to seep into the very bones of the city. But nowhere was it colder than inside courtroom 302 of the Thurgood Marshall United States Courthouse. It had been 6 months since the glittering disaster at the Pierre Hotel. 6 months since Julian Thorne had stood under crystal chandeliers, a glass of champagne in hand, and declared himself a king. Now the courtroom smelled of damp wool floor wax and the stale, nervous sweat of the accused. The gallery was packed to capacity. It was a sea of onlookers that included bitter ex-employees, sharks from Wall Street, and the relentless press corps, their pens poised like daggers. They were all there to witness the final act of the tragedy, the sentencing of the tech king. Julian sat at the defendant's table, his posture slumped. The transformation was shocking. Gone were the bespoke Italian suits that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. In their place, he wore a generic, ill-fitting charcoal suit provided by his public defender, a polyester blend that scratched at his neck. His hair, once thick and artfully styled, was thinning rapidly grey patches, claiming the temples. He had lost 20 pounds, his face gaunt and hollow, his eyes darting around the room with the frantic energy of a trapped animal. He wasn't listening to his lawyer, a beleaguered man named Mr. Henderson, who was shuffling papers with resigned exhaustion. Julian was too busy scanning the faces in the crowd behind him. He was looking for a savior. She has to come. Julian thought, his mind racing in circles. Flora always fixes it. She's angry, sure. She has a right to be. But she won't let me rot. She loves me. 12 years doesn't just disappear. His delusion was the only thing keeping him upright. He convinced himself that this was all a theatrical performance, a lesson she was teaching him. Any moment now she would walk in, speak to the judge, pay the restitution, and they would go home. He would apologize. He would be better. All rise. The bailiff bellowed his voice, bouncing off the high mahogany walls. Judge Holloway entered. He was a man of severe features, known in the Southern District as the Hammer for his disdain for white-collar criminals. He took his seat, his eyes scanning the room, before landing heavily on Julian. "Be seated," Holloway commanded. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Jenkins stood up first. She looked fresh, sharp, and victorious. "Your Honor, the government has proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that Mr. Thorne orchestrated a massive Ponzi scheme masked as a tech conglomerate. He defrauded investors of over $40 million. He destroyed the livelihoods of 300 employees. And he did it all to fund a lifestyle of grotesque excess." She paused, gesturing to Julian, as if he were a pile of refuse. "Mr. Thorne has shown zero remorse. Even in his interviews with the probation officer, he blamed market conditions and jealous rivals. He blamed everyone but himself. The prosecution recommends the maximum sentence." Julian flinched. Maximum sentence. The words echoed in his ears like a death knell. "Mr. Henderson," the judge asked. Julian's lawyer stood up, buttoning his cheap jacket. "Your Honor, my client is a first-time offender. He is a man of vision who got lost in the numbers." "I'd like to speak," Julian interrupted, standing up abruptly. His chair scraped loudly against the floor. Mr. Henderson grabbed his arm, hissing, "Sit down, Julian." "No!" Julian shook him off. He looked at the judge, his eyes wide and wet. "Your Honor, please. I'm not a criminal. I'm an innovator. I built Thorne Enterprises from a garage. I employ people I just need time to restructure. I can pay everyone back. I just need a chance." The judge looked at him over his spectacles, his expression unreadable. "You had a chance, Mr. Thorne. You had millions of dollars and the trust of the public. You squandered it on diamonds and penthouses." "I was misled," Julian cried, his voice cracking. "My mistress, Sasha Miller, she manipulated me. She's the one who wanted the lifestyle I was a victim of." Boom! The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a resounding thud that cut Julian off mid-sentence. The air in the room seemed to change instantly. The murmuring crowd fell dead silent. Heads turned in unison. Flora Vance stood in the doorway. She was a vision of ice and steel. She wore a white structural suit that looked tailored to the millimeter, glowing softly under the courtroom lights. It was a stark contrast to the drab greys and browns of the legal proceedings. Her hair was cut in a sharp, asymmetrical bob that framed her face like a helmet. She wore no jewelry save for a single item pinned to her lapel, the diamond brooch she had used to live-stream Julian's downfall. She didn't look at the press. She didn't look at the gallery. She walked down the center aisle, her heels striking the floor with a rhythmic, deliberate clack, clack, clack. It was the sound of a countdown. Magnus Vance was not with her. She did not need her father today. She was not a daughter seeking protection. She was a queen coming to execute judgment. Julian let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "Flora," he whispered, a smile breaking through his terror. "She came. She's wearing white. White is the color of forgiveness." Flora passed the bar and stopped at the prosecution's table. She nodded to Sarah Jenkins, then turned to the bench. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear, melodic, and carrying to the back of the room without a microphone. "I am Flora Vance. I am the primary victim of the defendant's personal fraud, and I represent the consortium of creditors he defrauded." Judge Holloway nodded respectfully. "The court recognizes Mrs. Vance. You may proceed with your impact statement." Flora turned. Slowly, deliberately, she pivoted on her heel to face Julian. Julian's smile faltered. He searched her eyes for warmth, for a spark of the woman who used to make him tea when he had a cold, the woman who had held him when he cried about his first failed business. He found nothing. Her eyes were like the lens of a camera, observant recording, but utterly devoid of feeling. "Hello, Julian," she said softly. "Flora," he choked out. Tell them we can fix this. Tell them about us." "There is no us." "Julian," she said, her voice projecting to the jury. "There hasn't been an us since the moment you decided I was an accessory that clashed with your new life." She walked closer to him, stopping just outside the reach of the bailiffs. "For 12 years I was your silent partner. I was the foundation you stood on. I laundered your ego, Julian. I scrubbed the stains of your incompetence so the world would see a shiny, successful man. I did it because I loved you. I did it because I thought we were building a life." She paused, tilting her head. "But you didn't want a life. You wanted an audience. And when the audience got bigger, you decided the person in the front row wasn't pretty enough anymore." "I was drunk," Julian pleaded, the tears flowing freely now. "The gala. I didn't mean it. It was the stress. It wasn't the alcohol," Flora corrected him, her voice hardening. "It was the arrogance. You called me dead weight. You demeaned me before your mistress, a woman you bought with my inheritance. You thought I was weak because I was quiet. You mistook my patience for stupidity." She turned back to the judge, pulling a document from her sleek leather portfolio. "Your Honor, the defendant has spent the last hour begging for a chance to save his company and protect his legacy. I think it is important for the court to know the current status of that legacy." Judge Holloway raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Flora held up the document. "As of 9:00 a.m. this morning, I have successfully acquired all outstanding debt and assets of Thorn Enterprises through a blind trust. I am now the sole owner of the company." Julian's jaw dropped. The courtroom erupted in whispers. You bought it?" Julian gasped. "Flora, that's amazing. We can rebuild you and me." Flora let out a short, dry laugh. It was a terrifying sound. "You misunderstand, Julian. I didn't buy it to run it. I bought it to bury it." She looked him dead in the eye, her expression turning lethal. "My first act as owner was to dissolve the corporation. The board has been fired. The assets are being liquidated. to pay back the pension funds you stole from your low-level employees. The headquarters building, I sold it to a waste management firm. Your corner office is going to be a storage closet for sanitation supplies." Julian gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. "You can't do that. It's my name, Thorne. Enterprises is my name." "And that brings me to the final point," Flora said, her voice dropping to a whisper that screamed across the room. "I have legally acquired the intellectual property rights to the brand Thorne. I am retiring it. I have issued a cease and desist on the use of the name. All signage is being removed as we speak. The website is down. The servers have been wiped." She leaned in her face, inches from the plexiglass divider. "By tomorrow morning, Julian Thorne Enterprises will not exist. In a year, no one will remember your logo. In 10 years, you will be nothing more than a cautionary footnote in business school textbooks about why you don't embezzle from your wife." She straightened up, smoothing her jacket. "You said I was dead weight, Julian. So I cut the cord. I am soaring. And you are finally free to sink." Flora walked away from him. She didn't look back at his shattered expression. She walked to the front row of the gallery and sat down, crossing her legs with the grace of a monarch. Julian sat frozen. It wasn't the prison time that broke him. It was this. The erasure. He wasn't just going to jail. He was being deleted from history. "Mr. Thorne, stand up," Judge Halloway barked. Julian stood swaying on his feet. He felt like a ghost. "Julian Thorne." The judge began, his voice grave. "You have engaged in a level of deceit and narcissism that is staggering even for this court. You betrayed the public trust. You betrayed your employees. And most egregiously, you betrayed the very family that sustained you." The judge picked up the gavel. "The court accepts the jury's verdict. I hereby sentence you to 25 years in a federal correctional institution." 25, Julian shrieked. "The guidelines said 20. You can't give me 25. I am adding 5 years for the obstruction of justice and the malicious concealment of assets," Halloway said coldly. "You are also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $50 million. You are banned for life from serving as an officer of any public company." Bang! The gavel struck the wood block with the finality of a coffin lid slamming shut. "Remand the defendant into custody immediately." "No!" Julian screamed as 2 large U.S. Marshals moved in on him. "No, wait! Flora, help me!" The Marshals grabbed him by the arms. The cheap fabric of his suit bunched up as they hauled him back. He kicked and thrashed, all dignity gone. "I'm sorry," he wailed, his voice cracking into a sob. "I'm sorry, Flora. I love you. Don't let them take me. I'm a billionaire. I'm a visionary." Flora watched the spectacle from her seat. She didn't blink. She didn't flinch. She watched as her husband, the man she had given 12 years of her life to, was dragged through the side door, his fingernails scraping against the wood frame, his screams echoing until the heavy door clicked shut. The silence that followed was heavy. Flora stood up. The show was over. As she made her way up the aisle, the press swarmed. They were kept back by the bailiffs, but they leaned over the railings, microphones thrust out like spears. "Mrs. Vance, Mrs. Vance," a reporter from the Times shouted. "You just decimated his company. You watched him get 25 years. Do you have any regrets? Do you feel any pity for him?" Flora stopped. She turned to the reporter. The camera flashes illuminated her face, catching the fire in her eyes. "Pity?" She asked the word, tasting strange on her tongue. She looked back at the empty defendant's chair, then at the reporter. A small, enigmatic smile played on her lips. "He wanted a trophy wife," she said calmly. "He just forgot that trophies are heavy. If you drop them, they break your toes. She turned and pushed through the double doors, stepping out of the suffocating courtroom and into the main atrium. Magnus Vance was waiting for her by the exit. He was leaning on his silver wolf cane, watching her approach. He saw the way she walked, shoulders back, head high, the weight of the last decade finally lifted from her spirit. "Is it done?" Magnus asked, his voice gruff but gentle. "It's done, Papa," Flora said. "And the company doggone," she replied. "I donated the remaining patent portfolio to a non-profit for young engineers. The rest is ash." Magnus smiled, linking his arm with hers. "Good. You know there's a board meeting at Vance Industries in an hour. We need a new CFO, someone who knows how to spot a liar." Flora smiled, and for the first time in years it reached her eyes. "I think I'm available," she said. Together they walked out of the courthouse doors. The storm outside had broken. The grey clouds were parting, revealing a piercing, brilliant blue sky. The air was cold, but it was clean. It tasted like freedom. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of Julian Thorne. It's a brutal reminder that in the game of life, you never really know who is holding the cards. Julian thought his power came from his bank account and his title. He didn't realize that his true power was the woman standing quietly in his shadow. He made the classic mistake of confusing kindness with weakness. He thought Flora was fragile because she was silent. But as we just saw, silence isn't empty, it's full of answers. Flora didn't just get revenge. She executed a masterclass in corporate warfare. She didn't just break his heart. She erased his name. What stood out to me the most was that final moment in the courtroom. She didn't scream, she didn't cry, she just stated the facts. She liquidated the asset. It's the ultimate mic drop. I want to know what you think. Was 25 years enough? Or was the erasure of his legacy the real punishment? And if you were Flora, would you have decimated his company, or would you have kept it for yourself? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this saga of betrayal and karma, please smash that like button. It helps the algorithm find more people who love a good justice story. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on that notification bell. I have another story coming up next week about a gold-digging husband who tries to steal his wife's lottery winnings only to find out the ticket was never real. You won't want to miss it. Until then, stay sharp and remember, be careful who you step on because they might be the ground holding you up. See you next time.